The judge who fulfilled the desire of a black inmate who has 3 days to live. Entire court went silent. The gavel slammed down like a gunshot, and Alana Brooks felt her heart stop. 3 days. 72 hours. 4,320 minutes until the state of Georgia would pump poison into her veins and call it justice. Judge Richard Callahan's cold gray eyes bore into her from behind his mahogany bench, the same eyes that had sentenced her to death 15 years ago when she was barely 23. The same eyes that had never once wavered, never once shown a flicker of doubt about condemning a black woman who swore on her mother's grave that she was innocent. "The execution will proceed as scheduled," Callahan announced, his voice cutting through the suffocating silence of courtroom 7A. "This court finds no grounds for further appeal." But Alana didn't collapse. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. Instead, she stood slowly, her shackled hands trembling not from fear, but from something else entirely. Something that made the bailiffs shift nervously and the prosecutor lean forward in his chair. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting in her chest. "I have one final request." Callahan's lip curled into the sneer that had become his trademark, the expression that said he'd rather listen to nails on a chalkboard than hear another word from her mouth. "Ms. Brooks, this court has heard enough of your... I want to sing." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that couldn't be extinguished. Every person in that courtroom, the guards, the lawyers, the handful of reporters, the young woman sitting alone in the back row with tears streaming down her face, froze. Judge Callahan blinked once. Twice. Then his face twisted into something between confusion and disgust. "Excuse me. I want to sing, Your Honor. One song. Before I die." Hey there, beautiful souls. Welcome back to our channel where we dive deep into stories that touch the heart and change lives forever. I can already feel the emotion building, and I know you can too. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. Are you feeling this intensity already? And if you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button because stories like this one are exactly why this channel exists. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. The silence stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. In the back of the courtroom, 18-year-old Maya Brooks, the daughter Alana had never been allowed to hold, never been allowed to know, pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle a sob. She had her mother's eyes, her mother's delicate features, but she carried the weight of growing up knowing her mother was a condemned killer. Except Maya had never believed it. Not for a single day. "This is a court of law, not a concert hall," Callahan spat, his knuckles white as he gripped his gavel. "Your request is denied. Bailiff, remove the prisoner." But Alana didn't move when the bailiff approached. She kept her eyes locked on the judge who had destroyed her life, and for the first time in 15 years, she saw something flicker behind his cold stare. Something that looked almost like curiosity. "My mama used to say my voice was a gift from God," Alana continued, her words cutting through the tension like a blade. "She said it was meant to touch lives, to heal hearts, to remind people that even in the darkest places, there's still light." The bailiff's hand hovered over her arm, but he didn't grab her. Something in her voice had stopped him cold. "My mama died while I was in here, Your Honor. Died believing her daughter was a murderer. And my baby girl." Alana's voice cracked as her eyes found Maya in the back row. "My baby girl has spent 18 years thinking her mama is a monster." Judge Callahan's jaw tightened. He built his career on being unmoved by sob stories, on being the iron fist of justice that showed no mercy to criminals, especially black criminals who, in his mind, were probably guilty of something even if they weren't guilty of the specific crime they'd been charged with. But something about the way Alana Brooks stood there, shackled and condemned but somehow still radiating a dignity he couldn't understand, made his chest feel tight. "I don't want to sing for fame, Your Honor. I don't want to sing for pity. I want to sing so that when they put me in the ground, my daughter will remember me as more than a woman in chains. I want her to remember that her mama had a voice, that her mama had a soul, that her mama loved her more than life itself, even if I never got the chance to tell her." The courtroom was so quiet you could hear hearts breaking. Maya Brooks stood up in the back row, her legs shaking, her face streaked with tears. "Please," she whispered, and though her voice was barely audible, it carried to every corner of the room. "Please let her sing." Judge Richard Callahan stared at the young woman who looked so much like the defendant it was like seeing a ghost. For 35 years on the bench, he had prided himself on never letting emotion cloud his judgment. He was the law. He was order. He was the wall that stood between civilization and chaos. But as he looked at Alana Brooks, really looked at her for the first time, he saw something that made his carefully constructed world begin to crack. He saw his own daughter's face. The daughter who had died in a car accident 10 years ago. The daughter who used to sing in the church choir. The daughter who had begged him, in her final moments in the hospital, to be kinder to the people who came before his bench. One song, he heard himself say, his voice barely above a whisper. The entire courtroom gasped. "Your Honor," the prosecutor stammered, half rising from his chair. Callahan's hand trembled as he set down his gavel. "One song, Ms. Brooks. But if this is some kind of stunt—" "It's not a stunt, Your Honor." Alana's voice was soft now, filled with a gratitude that made the judge's chest ache. "It's a mother's last gift to her child." And as Alana Brooks took a deep breath and opened her mouth to sing, Judge Richard Callahan had no idea that the next few minutes would shatter everything he thought he knew about justice, mercy, and the power of a human soul to transcend the darkest circumstances. The first note that escaped her lips would haunt him for the rest of his life. What song do you think Alana will choose? And what will happen when her voice fills that silent courtroom? Let me know in the comments below. I love hearing your thoughts on these powerful moments. The first note hung in the air like a prayer ascending to heaven, and Judge Richard Callahan felt something inside his chest crack open, something that had been sealed shut for decades. Alana's voice was pure velvet wrapped around broken glass, beautiful and haunting and so achingly human that it seemed impossible it could come from someone the state had labeled a cold-blooded killer. She had chosen Amazing Grace, not the polished, sanitized version sung in suburban churches, but the raw, soul-deep rendition that had been born in the cotton fields and slave quarters, passed down through generations of people who knew what it meant to need grace when the world offered none. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound, that saved a wretch like me. In the back row, Maya Brooks pressed both hands to her heart as if trying to keep it from shattering. This was her mother's voice, the voice she had dreamed about for 18 years, the voice she had imagined singing her lullabies as a baby, the voice that had been stolen from her by a system that had branded her mother a murderer before she'd even had a chance to prove her innocence. Maya had grown up in foster care, bounced between homes where people either pitied her for being the daughter of a killer or feared her for carrying bad blood. She'd learned to keep her head down, to never mention her mother's name, to pretend she didn't care that the woman who gave her life was rotting on death row. But she had cared. God, how she had cared. Every night for 18 years, she had fallen asleep wondering what her mother's voice sounded like. Now she knew, and it was more beautiful than anything she had ever imagined. "I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see." Judge Callahan's hands trembled as memories flooded back, memories he had spent 10 years trying to bury. His daughter Sarah, standing in their kitchen at age 16, her face flushed with righteous anger as she confronted him about a case she'd read about in the newspaper. "Daddy, how can you send that woman to prison for 20 years when you know she was just trying to feed her kids?" Sarah had demanded, her green eyes blazing with a kind of moral clarity that only the young possessed. "The law is the law, sweetheart," he had replied, not looking up from his morning paper. "If we start making exceptions based on sob stories, the whole system falls apart." "But what about mercy, Daddy? What about compassion? Isn't that supposed to matter too?" He had dismissed her concerns with a wave of his hand, told her she was too young to understand the complexities of justice. But Sarah had never stopped challenging him, never stopped believing that the law should serve humanity, not the other way around. And then she was gone, killed by a drunk driver on her way home from volunteering at a homeless shelter. The last words they had spoken to each other had been in anger. She had called him heartless, and he had called her naive. He would give anything to take those words back. "'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved." District Attorney William Hartwell shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his political instinct screaming that this was a disaster in the making. He had built his career on being tough on crime, especially when it came to high-profile cases involving black defendants. The Alana Brooks case had been his ticket to the governor's mansion, a clear-cut conviction that had made him a hero to law and order voters. But now, watching this woman sing with the voice of an angel, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: doubt. Hartwell remembered the night 15 years ago when his team had celebrated the guilty verdict at an expensive steakhouse downtown. They had toasted their victory with champagne while Alana Brooks sat in a cell, probably crying for the baby she would never see grow up. He had convinced himself then that justice had been served. The evidence had been circumstantial but compelling. Alana had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, with no alibi and a history of petty theft that made her an easy target for a jury looking for someone to blame. But there had always been that nagging voice in the back of his mind, the voice that whispered, what if she was telling the truth? What if they had gotten it wrong? How precious did that grace appear, the hour I first believed. In the jury box, empty now except for the ghosts of 12 people who had condemned an innocent woman, sat the memory of Mrs. Eleanor Whitman, the elderly white woman who had been the jury foreman 15 years ago. She had died 5 years after the trial, but not before confessing to her pastor that she had voted guilty not because she believed the evidence, but because she was afraid of what would happen to her neighborhood if they let that kind of person go free. The pastor had tried to convince her to come forward, but she had been too ashamed, too afraid of admitting that her prejudice had helped send an innocent woman to death row. Through many dangers, toils and snares, I have already come. Bailiff Thomas Rodriguez stood frozen by the courtroom door, his hand still hovering over his radio. He had been ordered to maintain security, to be ready to remove the prisoner if she caused any disruption. But this wasn't a disruption. This was something sacred, something that made him think of his own grandmother, who had raised him in a tiny apartment in East LA and taught him that every person, no matter how broken or lost, carried a spark of the divine. Rodriguez had seen hundreds of defendants pass through this courtroom over his 20-year career. He had learned to read people, to spot the ones who were genuinely remorseful versus the ones who were just sorry they got caught. And in all those years, he had never seen anyone carry themselves with the quiet dignity that Alana Brooks possessed. She didn't look like a killer. She looked like someone's mother, someone's daughter, someone who had been crushed by a system that was supposed to protect her. "'Tis grace hath brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home." As the final notes of the hymn faded into silence, Judge Callahan realized that something fundamental had shifted in the courtroom. The air itself felt different, charged with an electricity that had nothing to do with the fluorescent lights overhead and everything to do with the raw humanity that had just been laid bare before them. For the first time in his career, he found himself looking at a defendant and seeing not a criminal to be punished, but a human being to be understood. And that terrified him more than anything he had ever experienced. Because if Alana Brooks was innocent, if they had all been wrong, then what did that say about the hundreds of other cases he had presided over? What did that say about the system he had devoted his life to serving? What did that say about the man he had become? The silence stretched on, heavy with unspoken questions and the weight of 15 years of injustice. And in that silence, Judge Richard Callahan began to understand that he was about to face the most important decision of his life. A decision that would either damn his soul forever or offer him the same grace that Alana Brooks had just sung about with such heartbreaking beauty. The question was, did he have the courage to choose redemption over reputation? Did he have the strength to admit that he had been wrong? The power of that voice is giving me chills just writing about it. What do you think is going through the judge's mind right now? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I love seeing how these emotional moments hit different people. And if you're feeling this story as much as I am, make sure you're subscribed because we're just getting started. The silence shattered like glass when Maya Brooks stood up in the back row, her chair scraping against the floor with a sound that made everyone jump. "She's innocent." The words cut through the courtroom like a blade, and Judge Callahan felt his blood turn to ice. Maya's voice was stronger now, fueled by 18 years of suppressed rage and a mother's song that had just unlocked something fierce inside her soul. "She's innocent, and you all know it," Maya continued, her hand shaking as she stepped into the aisle. "You've always known it." District Attorney Hartwell shot to his feet. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The defendants, the young woman needs to be removed from." "Sit down, Mr. Hartwell." Judge Callahan's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. His eyes never left Maya's face, the face that looked so much like Alana's it was like staring into a mirror that reflected 15 years of buried guilt. Maya took another step forward, and Bailiff Rodriguez moved to intercept her, but Callahan held up a hand to stop him. Something in the judge's chest was screaming that this moment, this exact moment, was why he had been put on this earth. Everything else had been preparation for what was about to happen. "What's your name, young lady?" Callahan asked, though he already knew the answer. "Maya Brooks." Her voice cracked on her mother's surname, the name she had been forbidden to use in most of the foster homes, the name that had been a source of shame for 18 years. "I'm her daughter. The baby she gave birth to in prison. The baby you people stole from her before she could even hold me." The courtroom erupted in whispers, but Callahan slammed his gavel once, and silence fell like a curtain. "And what makes you think your mother is innocent, Ms. Brooks?" Maya reached into her backpack with trembling hands and pulled out a manila folder that looked like it had been handled 1,000 times. The edges were worn, the corners bent, and Judge Callahan could see that it was stuffed with papers, photographs, and what looked like legal documents. "Because I've spent the last 5 years investigating this case myself," Maya said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Because I've found evidence that was never presented at trial. Because I've tracked down witnesses who were never interviewed. Because I've uncovered a conspiracy that goes all the way to the top of this courthouse." The folder hit the defense table with a sound like thunder, and everyone in the courtroom leaned forward as if pulled by an invisible force. Alana Brooks gasped, her shackled hands flying to her mouth. "Maya, baby, what have you done?" "What I should have done years ago, Mama." Maya's voice broke on the word Mama, the first time she had ever said it out loud. "What everyone else should have done. I found the truth." Judge Callahan felt the world tilt on its axis. In 35 years on the bench, he had never had a case take a turn like this. His instinct screamed at him to shut this down, to maintain order, to follow protocol. But a deeper voice, one that sounded suspiciously like his dead daughter Sarah, whispered that protocol had already failed spectacularly. "Your Honor," Hartwell said, his face flushed red with panic, "this is completely improper. Whatever this young woman thinks she's found, it should go through the proper appellate channels." The appellate channels failed her. Maya spun around to face the prosecutor, and the fury in her eyes made him take a step back. "You know they failed her because you made sure they would fail her. You buried evidence. You intimidated witnesses. You built your entire career on sending an innocent woman to death row." "That's enough." Hartwell slammed his hand on the table. "Your Honor, I demand that this disruption be stopped immediately. The defendant has been tried, convicted, and sentenced according to the law. This circus is nothing more than a desperate attempt to what?" Judge Callahan's voice cut through Hartwell's protests like a sword. "To save an innocent woman's life? To expose the truth? To seek justice?" The words hung in the air, and Callahan realized with a shock that he had just challenged the very system he had spent his life defending. But as he looked at Maya Brooks, this brave, brilliant young woman who had spent 5 years fighting for a mother she barely knew, he felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. He felt proud. "Ms. Brooks," he said quietly, "approach the bench." Maya walked forward on unsteady legs, clutching the folder to her chest like a shield. When she reached the judge's bench, she looked up at him with eyes that held no fear, only determination. "Tell me what you found," Callahan said, his voice so low that only she could hear him. Maya opened the folder and pulled out a photograph that made the judge's breath catch in his throat. It showed a man he recognized, Detective Ray Morrison, the lead investigator on the Alana Brooks case. But Morrison wasn't in uniform. He was in civilian clothes, shaking hands with Vincent Torino, a known drug dealer who had been the real target of the investigation 15 years ago. Detective Morrison was on Torino's payroll, Maya whispered. He needed a scapegoat when the murder happened, someone who couldn't fight back. "My mother was perfect, young, black, poor, with a record of petty theft. Morrison planted evidence, coerced witnesses, and made sure the real killer walked free." Judge Callahan's hands shook as he stared at the photograph. Morrison had been a hero cop, decorated and respected. He had testified with such conviction at Alana's trial that even Callahan had been impressed by his dedication to justice. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "Morrison's ex-wife. She came forward last year, right before he died of cancer. She said he confessed everything on his deathbed, said he couldn't go to hell carrying that secret." Maya pulled out another document. "This is his signed confession, witnessed by a priest and a nurse. He names Torino as the real killer and admits to framing my mother." The confession was 3 pages long, written in Morrison's shaky handwriting. As Callahan read it, he felt his entire worldview crumble. Morrison detailed how he had planted Alana's fingerprints at the crime scene, how he had threatened witnesses into lying, how he had hidden exculpatory evidence that would have proven her innocence. "Your Honor," Maya continued, her voice urgent, "Torino is still alive. He's in federal prison in Atlanta on drug charges. I've been corresponding with him for 2 years, and he's ready to confess. He's dying of liver disease, and he wants to clear his conscience before he meets his maker." Judge Callahan looked up from the confession to find the entire courtroom staring at him. Alana Brooks sat frozen at the defense table, tears streaming down her face. Hartwell looked like he was about to have a heart attack. The court reporter's fingers hovered over her keyboard, waiting to record whatever happened next. And in that moment, Richard Callahan understood that he was standing at a crossroads that would define not just the rest of his career, but the rest of his life. He could follow protocol. He could send this evidence through the proper channels, let the appeals process run its course, and wash his hands of the whole mess. Alana Brooks would die in 3 days, and he could retire with his reputation intact. Or he could do something unprecedented. Something that would probably end his career and certainly destroy his standing in the legal community. He could choose justice over procedure, truth over tradition, mercy over the merciless machinery of the law. "Bailiff Rodriguez," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent courtroom. "Yes, Your Honor." "Remove Ms. Brooks' shackles." The gasp that went up from the courtroom sounded like a collective intake of breath from a drowning world suddenly offered air. "Your Honor," Hartwell stammered, "you can't possibly." "I can and I will." Judge Callahan stood up, his black robes billowing around him like the wings of an avenging angel. "This court is going to hear this evidence. All of it. Right now." As Rodriguez moved to unlock Alana's shackles, Judge Callahan caught sight of his reflection in the courtroom's windows. For the first time in years, he recognized the man staring back at him. He looked like someone his daughter Sarah would have been proud of. And as Alana Brooks rubbed her freed wrists and looked up at him with wonder and gratitude, Judge Richard Callahan realized that he was about to either commit the greatest act of justice of his career, or the most spectacular professional suicide in legal history. Either way, he was finally going to be able to sleep at night. Oh my goodness! Did you feel that shift? The moment when everything changed? I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about what's coming next. What do you think the judge should do? Let me know in the comments below, and if you're as invested in this story as I am, smash that subscribe button because we're about to dive into some serious emotional territory. The metallic clink of shackles hitting the floor echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot, and Alana Brooks stared at her freed hands as if they belonged to someone else. For 15 years, she had worn chains, literal and metaphorical, and now in this impossible moment, she was free to move, free to breathe, free to reach out and touch her daughter for the first time. But she didn't move. Not yet. Because she could see the war raging behind Judge Callahan's eyes, and she knew that one wrong move could send her back to death row faster than a heartbeat. "Your Honor," District Attorney Hartwell's voice cracked like a whip, "I must protest in the strongest possible terms. This is a gross violation of procedure. The defendant is a convicted murderer scheduled for execution in 68 hours, Judge Callahan interrupted, his gaze never leaving Alana's face. "I'm aware of the timeline, Mr. Hartwell, which is why we're going to expedite this hearing." Maya Brooks stood frozen in the aisle, the manila folder still clutched to her chest, watching her mother flex her fingers like she was remembering what freedom felt like. The resemblance between them was striking now that they were both standing, the same delicate bone structure, the same proud set of the shoulders, the same eyes that held depths of pain and strength in equal measure. "Mama," Maya whispered, and the word carried across the silent courtroom like a prayer. Alana turned toward her daughter, and for a moment, the 15 years of separation collapsed into nothing. She saw herself at 18 in Maya's face, saw the dreams she'd once carried before the world had crushed them under the weight of injustice. But she also saw something else, a strength that she had never possessed, a fierce intelligence that had somehow bloomed despite being planted in the rocky soil of foster care and abandonment. "My baby girl," Alana breathed, taking a tentative step forward. "Look how beautiful you are. Look how strong." Judge Callahan watched the reunion with something twisting in his chest. He thought of Sarah again, of all the moments he had missed because he was too busy dispensing justice to notice that his own daughter was growing up without him. How many dinners had he skipped? How many school plays had he missed? How many times had Sarah tried to tell him about her day, only to be dismissed because he was reviewing case files? "Your Honor," Hartwell tried again, his voice rising with desperation, "if you allow this emotional manipulation to influence your judgment, you'll be setting a precedent that will destroy the integrity of our entire judicial system. Every convicted criminal will claim they have new evidence, every." "Mr. Hartwell." Judge Callahan's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. "In 35 years on this bench, I have never once allowed emotion to cloud my judgment. I have been the very model of judicial restraint. And in all that time, I have never once stopped to ask myself a very simple question. What if I was wrong? The prosecutor's face went pale. Your Honor, you can't seriously be considering. I'm not considering anything yet. I'm going to examine the evidence that Ms. Brooks has presented, and then I'm going to make a decision based on the facts. Callahan's eyes swept the courtroom, taking in the reporters who were frantically scribbling notes, the court staff who looked like they were witnessing the impossible, the handful of spectators who had wandered in expecting a routine hearing and instead found themselves in the middle of legal history. But I want everyone in this room to understand something, he continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. If, and I emphasize if, this evidence proves that an innocent woman has spent 15 years on death row, then every single person who participated in that injustice will be held accountable. Every single person. His gaze lingered on Hartwell, who looked like he was about to be sick. Maya stepped forward, emboldened by the judge's words. Your Honor, there's more. So much more. She opened the folder again and pulled out a stack of photographs. These are pictures of the crime scene that were never shown to the jury. They prove that the murder weapon couldn't have been held by someone of my mother's height and build. She handed the photos to Bailiff Rodriguez, who carried them to the judge's bench. Callahan studied them with the intensity of a man examining his own soul, and what he saw made his hands shake. The blood spatter patterns were all wrong. The angle of the wounds was impossible for someone of Alana's stature to have inflicted. Any competent forensic expert would have spotted the discrepancies immediately. Who was the forensic expert at the original trial? Callahan asked, though he was beginning to suspect he already knew the answer. Dr. Marcus Webb, Maya replied, and the judge's heart sank. Webb had been Morrison's brother-in-law, a fact that had somehow never come to light during the trial. He's since been stripped of his license for falsifying evidence in 3 other cases, all of them involving black defendants. The pattern was becoming clear now, and it was uglier than anything Callahan had imagined. This wasn't just a case of sloppy police work or prosecutorial overzealousness. This was a deliberate conspiracy to frame an innocent woman, carried out by people who had sworn oaths to uphold justice. Your Honor, Alana spoke for the first time since her shackles had been removed, her voice soft but steady. I know this is hard to believe. I know it sounds impossible. But I swear to you, on my mother's grave and on my daughter's life, I did not kill that man. I was home that night, taking care of my sick neighbor's baby. Mrs. Patterson, she tried to testify for me, but Detective Morrison threatened to have her grandchildren taken away if she spoke up. Mrs. Patterson is still alive, Maya added quickly. She's 87 now, living in a nursing home in Savannah. I visited her last month, and she's ready to tell the truth. She's been carrying this guilt for 15 years, watching an innocent woman sit on death row while the real killer walked free. Judge Callahan felt the weight of 15 years of injustice settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. How many nights had Alana Brooks lain awake in her cell, staring at the ceiling and wondering if anyone would ever believe her? How many times had she written letters that went unanswered, filed appeals that were dismissed without consideration, prayed to a God who seemed to have abandoned her? And Maya, dear God, what had this brilliant young woman sacrificed to uncover the truth? What kind of life had she given up to fight for a mother she barely knew? Ms. Brooks, he said, addressing Maya, how did you manage to conduct this investigation? The resources alone must have been. I worked 3 jobs through high school and college, Maya replied, her chin lifting with pride. Saved every penny I could. I taught myself legal research, spent countless hours in law libraries, tracked down witnesses who had scattered across the country. I sold everything I owned to hire a private investigator to help me find Detective Morrison's ex-wife. She paused, her voice catching slightly. I gave up my scholarship to medical school to focus on this full-time. My foster parents thought I was crazy, throwing my life away for a woman who was probably guilty anyway. But I knew, I've always known, that my mother was innocent. A daughter knows these things, even when she's never been allowed to know her mother. The courtroom was so quiet that the hum of the fluorescent lights sounded like thunder. Judge Callahan looked at this remarkable young woman who had sacrificed her own dreams to save her mother's life, and he felt something break open inside his chest. Mr. Hartwell, he said, turning to the prosecutor, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want a direct answer. Did you know about any of this evidence 15 years ago? Hartwell's face cycled through several shades of red before settling on a sickly gray. Your Honor, The investigation was conducted by the police department. I relied on their findings and— That's not what I asked you. Callahan's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. Did you know that Detective Morrison was corrupt? Did you know that Dr. Webb was falsifying evidence? Did you know that witnesses were being intimidated? The silence stretched like a rubber band about to snap. Everyone in the courtroom could see Hartwell's internal struggle, could watch him weighing his options: tell the truth and destroy his career, or lie and risk perjury charges. I had suspicions, he finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. But I couldn't prove anything, and the case was so high profile. The pressure to get a conviction was enormous. The mayor, the police chief, the governor, everyone wanted this solved quickly and cleanly. So you sacrificed an innocent woman's life for political expediency, Callahan said, and it wasn't a question. Hartwell's shoulders sagged in defeat. I told myself that even if she didn't commit this particular crime, she was probably guilty of something else. People like her always are. The words hung in the air like poison gas, and Judge Callahan felt a rage unlike anything he had ever experienced. Not just at Hartwell, but at himself, at a system that had allowed this to happen, at a society that had made it possible for people like her to be disposable. People like her, he repeated slowly. You mean black people, Mr. Hartwell? Poor people? People who don't have the resources to fight back when the system decides to destroy them. Hartwell said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. Judge Callahan stood up, his black robes billowing around him like the wings of justice finally taking flight. This hearing is adjourned until tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. I'm ordering an immediate stay of execution pending a full review of this evidence. The courtroom erupted in chaos, reporters shouting questions, spectators gasping in shock, Hartwell's team huddling in panicked whispers. But through it all, Judge Callahan kept his eyes on Alana and Maya Brooks, watching as mother and daughter finally reached for each other across 15 years of stolen time. When their hands touched, when Alana pulled her daughter into the embrace she had dreamed of for nearly 2 decades, Judge Callahan felt tears streaming down his face for the first time since Sarah's funeral. And for the first time in his career, he didn't care who saw them. I'm literally crying writing this. The moment when they finally touch. Can you imagine? 15 years of separation ending in that one perfect moment. What do you think happens next? Will justice finally prevail? Drop your thoughts below and let me know if you're feeling this emotional roller coaster as much as I am. The embrace lasted only seconds before Bailiff Rodriguez gently separated them. Protocol still demanded some boundaries, even in this unprecedented moment. But those few seconds changed everything. Alana had felt her daughter's heartbeat against her chest, had breathed in the scent of her hair, had whispered "I love you" into her ear for the first time. Maya's tears soaked into her mother's orange jumpsuit as she whispered back, "I love you too, Mama. I've always loved you." Judge Callahan watched from his bench, his own vision blurred with tears he couldn't stop. In 35 years of dispensing justice, he had never seen anything so pure, so heartbreaking, so fundamentally right as a mother holding her child. But as the courtroom slowly emptied and the reality of what had just happened began to sink in, Callahan realized that his problems were just beginning. By tomorrow morning, this story would be on every news channel in the country. His phone was probably already ringing off the hook with calls from the state attorney general, the governor, maybe even federal officials demanding to know what the hell he thought he was doing. He had just blown up his entire career for a woman he had sentenced to death 15 years ago. And he had never felt more certain that he was doing the right thing. Your Honor. Maya's voice broke through his thoughts. She was standing beside her mother, their hands still clasped together like they were afraid to let go. Thank you. I know this wasn't easy, and I know you're taking a huge risk. But thank you for listening. Callahan nodded, not trusting his voice. Then something occurred to him, something that made his blood run cold. Ms. Brooks, he said, addressing Maya, you said you've been investigating this case for 5 years. That you've uncovered evidence of a conspiracy. Have you considered that the people involved in framing your mother might not want this information to come to light? Maya's face went pale. What do you mean? I mean that if Detective Morrison was corrupt, if Dr. Webb was falsifying evidence, if witnesses were intimidated, then there are people out there who have spent 15 years believing the secret was buried forever. People who might be willing to do anything to keep it that way. The implications hit Maya like a physical blow. She had been so focused on gathering evidence, on building her case, that she hadn't fully considered the danger she might be putting herself in. These weren't just corrupt officials. These were people who had already destroyed one innocent life. What would stop them from destroying another? Your Honor, Alana said, her voice tight with fear, my baby has to be protected. If something happens to her because of this. Nothing is going to happen to her, Callahan said firmly. Bailiff Rodriguez, I want Ms. Brooks placed in protective custody immediately. And I want a full security detail assigned to this courthouse for tomorrow's hearing. Rodriguez nodded and reached for his radio, but before he could speak, the courtroom doors burst open with a crash that made everyone jump. 3 men in expensive suits strode in, their faces grim with purpose. The man in the lead was tall and silver-haired, with a kind of commanding presence that suggested he was used to getting his way. Judge Callahan recognized him immediately, Senator James Morrison, Detective Ray Morrison's younger brother, and one of the most powerful politicians in the state. Behind him walked Police Chief Harold Brennan, a man whose career had been built on the foundation of the Alana Brooks conviction, and District Attorney General Robert Kane, Hartwell's boss and the man who had personally overseen the prosecution 15 years ago. Judge Callahan, Senator Morrison said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never been told no. I think we need to have a conversation. The temperature in the courtroom seemed to drop 10 degrees. Maya instinctively moved closer to her mother, and Alana's hand tightened protectively around her daughter's. Senator Morrison, Callahan replied, his voice carefully neutral. This is highly irregular. Court is not in session, and... Cut the bullshit, Richard. Morrison's mask of political civility slipped, revealing something much uglier underneath. You know why we're here. You know what you're playing with. And you know the consequences of continuing down this path. Judge Callahan felt his spine stiffen. In all his years on the bench, no one had ever spoken to him with such blatant disrespect in his own courtroom. I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about, Senator. I'm simply reviewing new evidence in a capital case, as is my duty under the law. Police Chief Brennan stepped forward, his hand resting casually on his service weapon. Judge, with all due respect, you're about to destroy the careers and reputations of a lot of good people based on the word of a convicted killer and her delusional daughter. Delusional. Maya's voice cracked like a whip. I have photographs, signed confessions, witness statements. You have fabricated evidence and the desperate lies of a dying man, District Attorney General Kane interrupted. Vincent Torino is a career criminal who would say anything to reduce his sentence. Detective Morrison's so-called confession is the product of a morphine-addled mind in his final hours. And as for the forensic evidence, the forensic evidence proves my mother is innocent. Maya shot back, her fear transforming into righteous fury. And you know it. You've always known it. Senator Morrison's eyes narrowed as he studied Maya's face. You look just like her, you know. Just like your mother when she was your age. Same defiant attitude. Same refusal to accept reality. There was something in his tone that made Alana's blood freeze. Something that suggested this wasn't the first time he had seen that resemblance. You knew her, Alana whispered, the pieces suddenly clicking into place. Before the trial. You knew me. Morrison's smile was cold as winter. Oh, Alana. Sweet, naive little Alana. Did you really think it was a coincidence that you were chosen as the scapegoat? Did you really think my brother just happened to pick you out of all the possible suspects? The courtroom went dead silent. Judge Callahan felt his heart stop beating. What are you saying? Alana's voice was barely audible. I'm saying that 15 years ago, you were a beautiful young woman who caught the attention of some very powerful men. Men who were used to getting what they wanted, when they wanted it. Morrison's eyes glittered with malice. And when you refused their advances, when you had the audacity to reject them, they decided to teach you a lesson about your place in the world. Maya's face went white as the full horror of what he was implying sank in. You're saying they framed her because she wouldn't, because she said no to. I'm saying your mother was uppity, Morrison said, using the word like a weapon. She thought she was too good for the men who offered her opportunities. She thought she could just walk away and live her little life without consequences. So we gave her consequences. Judge Callahan rose from his bench like an avenging angel, his face twisted with rage. Are you confessing to conspiracy, Senator? To framing an innocent woman for murder? Morrison laughed, a sound like breaking glass. I'm not confessing to anything, Judge. I'm simply explaining the facts of life to some people who seem to have forgotten their place in the natural order of things. He turned his attention back to Maya, and his smile became predatory. You're a beautiful young woman, just like your mother was. Smart, too. You could have a very bright future ahead of you, college, career, maybe even a family of your own. It would be a shame if all of that was derailed by your obsession with ancient history. The threat was unmistakable, and Maya felt ice water flowing through her veins. But instead of backing down, she lifted her chin and stared Morrison directly in the eyes. Are you threatening me, Senator? I'm offering you a choice, Morrison replied smoothly. Walk away from this crusade. Let your mother die with whatever dignity she has left. And in return, I'll make sure you have every opportunity to build the life you deserve. Full scholarship to any medical school in the country. Guaranteed residency at the hospital of your choice. A future that your mother could never have given you. And if I refuse? Morrison's smile disappeared entirely. Then you'll discover that accidents happen to young women who don't know when to keep their mouths shut. Car crashes. Muggings gone wrong. Drug overdoses. The world is a dangerous place, especially for someone with no family to protect them. The silence that followed was deafening. Judge Callahan felt something snap inside his chest. Not break, but snap back into place, like a bone that had been dislocated for years finally returning to its proper position. Bailiff Rodriguez, he said, his voice carrying across the courtroom like thunder. Yes, Your Honor. Arrest Senator Morrison for conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, and threatening a witness. Morrison's face went purple with rage. You can't be serious. Do you have any idea who I am? Do you know what I can do to you? I know exactly who you are, Callahan replied, standing to his full height. You're a corrupt politician who helped frame an innocent woman for murder because she had the courage to say no to you and your friends. And now you're going to pay for it. Rodriguez moved toward Morrison, his hand on his handcuffs, but Police Chief Brennan stepped between them. I don't think so, Brennan said, his weapon now clearly visible. Nobody's arresting anybody today. The standoff stretched like a taut wire, and Judge Callahan realized that they had just crossed a line from which there was no return. This wasn't just about Alana Brooks anymore. This was about a conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of state government, involving people who would kill to protect their secrets. And he had just declared war on all of them. Your Honor, Maya said quietly, her voice steady despite the terror in her eyes, there's something else you need to know. Something I haven't told you yet. Morrison spun toward her, his face twisted with fury. Shut your mouth, you little. I'm pregnant. The words hit the courtroom like a bomb. Maya's hand moved instinctively to her stomach, and Alana gasped as the implication sank in. I'm 8 weeks pregnant, Maya continued, her voice growing stronger. And if something happens to me, if I have an accident or disappear, there are people who know the truth. Journalists, lawyers, federal agents. The evidence is already in their hands. Killing me won't stop this story from coming out, it will only make it bigger. Morrison's face went through several shades of red before settling on a dangerous purple. You're bluffing. Maya smiled, and for the first time, Judge Callahan saw Alana's strength shining through her daughter's features. Try me. The standoff continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then Morrison nodded to Brennan and Kane, and the three men began backing toward the door. This isn't over, Morrison said, his voice dripping with venom. Not by a long shot. You have no idea what you've started here, Judge. No idea what you're up against. I know exactly what I'm up against, Callahan replied. And I'm not afraid of you anymore. As the three men disappeared through the courtroom doors, Judge Callahan sank back into his chair, his hands shaking with adrenaline and terror and something that felt suspiciously like hope. He looked at Alana and Maya Brooks, mother and daughter, finally reunited, standing together against forces that had tried to destroy them both. And he realized that tomorrow's hearing wasn't just about overturning a wrongful conviction. It was about taking down a conspiracy that had poisoned the very foundations of justice in their state. It was about redemption, not just for Alana Brooks, but for everyone who had failed her. And it was about proving that sometimes, just sometimes, the truth was stronger than the lies that tried to bury it. Whoa! Did you see that coming? The conspiracy goes so much deeper than we thought. Senator Morrison just revealed the real reason behind Alana's conviction, and now Maya is in serious danger. But did you catch that bombshell at the end? Maya's pregnant. This changes everything. What do you think happens next? Let me know in the comments, and if you're as shocked as I am, make sure you're subscribed because this story is about to get even more intense. The courthouse felt like a tomb at 3 a.m. Judge Callahan sat alone in his chambers, surrounded by case files and legal precedents that seemed meaningless in the face of what he had uncovered. The coffee in his mug had gone cold hours ago, but he barely noticed. His hands shook as he read through Maya's evidence for the 100th time, each document a nail in the coffin of everything he had believed about justice. Outside his window, he could see the unmarked cars that had been circling the courthouse since midnight. Morrison's people, no doubt, making sure he understood that he was being watched, that his every move was being monitored by forces far more powerful than a small-town judge. His phone buzzed with another text message. The 15th one in the past hour. Your daughter Sarah would be ashamed of what you're doing. Don't make her death meaningless by destroying everything she believed in. Callahan's hands clenched into fists. Using Sarah's memory against him was a new low, even for Morrison's people. But the worst part was the tiny voice in the back of his mind that whispered, what if they're right? What if you're destroying the system Sarah wanted you to serve? A soft knock on his door interrupted his spiral of doubt. Come in, he called, expecting to see his clerk or perhaps Bailiff Rodriguez. Instead, Maya Brooks stepped into his chambers, her face pale but determined. She was no longer in protective custody. She had refused it, claiming she needed to be free to prepare for tomorrow's hearing. Ms. Brooks, Callahan said, rising from his chair. You shouldn't be here. It's not safe. Nowhere is safe anymore, Your Honor. Maya's voice was steady, but he could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight of carrying a secret that could destroy powerful men. They've made that very clear. She moved to the window and peered through the blinds at the cars below. They've been following me since I left the courthouse. 3 different vehicles, rotating every few hours. Very professional. Maya, you need to go back into protective custody. What you're doing, what we're all doing, it's dangerous. These people have already killed to protect their secrets. Maya turned away from the window, and Callahan was struck again by how much she looked like her mother. The same fierce intelligence, the same refusal to be broken by circumstances that would have destroyed a lesser person. Your Honor, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you have children? The question hit him like a physical blow. I had a daughter. Sarah. She died 10 years ago. Maya's expression softened. I'm sorry. What was she like? Callahan found himself smiling despite everything. She was everything good about this world. Kind, passionate, determined to make things better. She wanted to be a civil rights lawyer, wanted to fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves. She sounds like someone who would understand why we're doing this. She would have been the first one to tell me to help you, Callahan admitted. She always said that justice without mercy wasn't justice at all. It was just revenge dressed up in fancy robes. Maya nodded, then reached into her bag and pulled out a manila envelope. Your Honor, there's something else. Something I didn't show you in court today because I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure if I could trust you. Callahan felt his heart sink. And now I know that you're risking everything to save my mother. So I'm going to risk everything to save you. She handed him the envelope, and with trembling fingers, he opened it. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, showing Senator Morrison, Police Chief Brennan, and District Attorney General Kane at what appeared to be a private party. But this wasn't just any party. The photos showed young women, some who looked barely 18, in various states of undress, clearly intoxicated or drugged. And in several of the images, Callahan could see Morrison and the others in compromising positions with these women. Dear God, he whispered. There's more, Maya said quietly. The party was 15 years ago, just 2 weeks before my mother was arrested. And one of the women in those photos. She pointed to a young black woman who was clearly trying to get away from Morrison's grabbing hands. That's my mother. The room spun around Callahan as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. This wasn't just about framing an innocent woman for murder. This was about covering up sexual assault, about powerful men who thought they could take whatever they wanted from whoever they wanted. Where did you get these? The photographer was a man named Eddie Vasquez. He was hired to document the party for blackmail purposes. Apparently this was a regular thing, and someone was collecting evidence on the attendees. Eddie kept copies of everything as insurance. Where is he now? Maya's face went dark. Dead. Car accident 3 days after my mother was arrested. But before he died, he gave the photos to his sister Maria. She's been hiding them for 15 years, too scared to come forward. And she gave them to you? She's dying of cancer. She said she couldn't go to her grave knowing that an innocent woman was going to die for refusing to be raped by these monsters. Callahan stared at the photographs, his mind reeling. These images didn't just prove Alana's innocence. They provided a motive for the conspiracy that went far beyond simple corruption. Morrison and his friends hadn't just framed her for murder. They had destroyed her life because she had fought back against their assault. Maya, this changes everything. With this evidence, we can. The lights went out. The courthouse plunged into absolute darkness, and Callahan heard Maya's sharp intake of breath. Emergency lighting should have kicked in immediately, but nothing happened. They were trapped in his chambers, blind and vulnerable. Your Honor, Maya whispered, we need to get out of here. Now. Callahan fumbled for his phone, using its flashlight to navigate toward the door. But when he tried the handle, it wouldn't turn. They were locked in. The windows, Maya said urgently. Can we get out through the windows? Callahan shone his phone light toward the windows, but his heart sank. They were on the 4th floor, and the windows didn't open. Even if they could break the glass, it would be a fatal drop. A sound from the hallway made them both freeze, footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving toward his chambers. Judge Callahan, a voice called through the door. It was Police Chief Brennan, but his tone was different now. Colder. More dangerous. We need to talk. I have nothing to say to you, Chief, Callahan replied, trying to keep his voice steady. Oh, but you do. You see, we've been monitoring your communications. We know about the evidence Ms. Brooks has been gathering. We know about the photographs. And we know that you're planning to use them to destroy good men who have served this community for decades. Maya grabbed Callahan's arm, her fingers digging into his flesh. In the dim light of his phone, he could see the terror in her eyes. Here's what's going to happen, Brennan continued. You're going to rule tomorrow that the new evidence is inadmissible. You're going to allow the execution to proceed as scheduled. And Ms. Brooks is going to disappear, permanently. And if I refuse? Brennan's laugh was like broken glass. Then you'll both have a tragic accident tonight. Gas leak, maybe. Or a fire. These old buildings are so dangerous. Callahan could smell it now, the faint odor of natural gas seeping under the door. They were going to kill them both and make it look like an accident. Your Honor, Maya whispered, my phone. I've been live streaming everything to social media since I got here. Thousands of people are watching right now. Callahan's eyes widened. This brilliant young woman had been one step ahead of them the entire time. Chief Brennan, he called out, his voice stronger now. I think you should know that this entire conversation is being broadcast live to the internet. Thousands of people have heard you threaten to murder a judge and an innocent woman. The silence from the hallway was deafening. Then Brennan's voice came back, but now it was filled with rage. You think you're clever? You think some social media stunt is going to save you? We own the internet providers in this town. We can shut down any signal we want. As if to prove his point, Maya's phone suddenly went dead. The live stream cut off, and they were plunged back into darkness. No one is coming to save you, Brennan continued. No one even knows you're here. And by morning, you'll both be dead, and Alana Brooks will be executed as scheduled. The gas smell was getting stronger now. Callahan estimated they had maybe 10 minutes before the concentration became lethal. And even if they could somehow survive the gas, Brennan and his men would be waiting outside with guns. Maya, he whispered, is there any other evidence? Anything else that could save your mother if we don't make it out of here? Maya's voice was barely audible. I sent copies of everything to a reporter at the Washington Post. But they won't publish without corroboration, and I'm the only witness who can verify the authenticity of the documents. Callahan closed his eyes, feeling the weight of failure crushing down on him. He had come so close to redemption, so close to finally doing the right thing. But in the end, He was going to fail Alana Brooks just like he had failed his own daughter. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry I couldn't save her." Maya's hand found his in the darkness, and her grip was surprisingly strong. "Your Honor, you did save her. Maybe not her life, but you saved her soul. For 15 years, my mother has lived with the knowledge that the world saw her as a monster. But today, for the first time, someone in authority looked at her and saw the truth. Someone believed her. That matters more than you know." Tears streamed down Callahan's face as the gas continued to seep into the room. In a few minutes, they would both be unconscious. In an hour, they would be dead. And tomorrow, Alana Brooks would be executed for a crime she didn't commit. But Maya was right about one thing. They had given Alana something precious in her final hours. They had given her the knowledge that someone had finally seen the truth. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. As the gas began to make him dizzy, Judge Richard Callahan thought about his daughter Sarah, about the woman she would have become, about the justice she would have fought for. And he hoped that somewhere, somehow, she knew that in the end, he had tried to be the man she always believed he could be. Even if he had failed. The darkness closed in around them, and the last thing Callahan heard was Maya's voice, weak but defiant, whispering into the poisoned air. "Mama, I love you. I tried. I'm sorry I couldn't save you." And then there was nothing but silence and the smell of gas and the terrible knowledge that evil had won again. No. This can't be how it ends. I'm literally on the edge of my seat right now. Are they really going to die? Is Alana going to be executed? The corruption goes so deep, and these monsters will stop at nothing. But wait. Maya was live streaming. Someone must have seen something. What do you think happens next? Drop your theories in the comments because I need to know I'm not the only one who's completely devastated right now. The sound of shattering glass pierced through the toxic haze like a gunshot. Judge Callahan's eyes snapped open, his lungs burning as he gasped for air that tasted like poison. Through the fog of near unconsciousness, he saw a figure rappelling through his broken office window, a woman in tactical gear with FBI emblazoned across her vest. Federal agents. Nobody move. The voice belonged to Special Agent Diana Chun, and she was followed by 3 more agents who moved with the precision of a military unit. One of them immediately began setting up ventilation equipment, while another checked Callahan and Maya for signs of life. "They're alive," the medic called out. "Barely. We need to get them out of here now." As oxygen masks were placed over their faces, Callahan heard the sound of gunfire from the hallway. Brennan and his men weren't going down without a fight. "How?" Maya gasped through her oxygen mask, her voice barely audible. Agent Chen knelt beside her, her face grim but determined. "Your live stream didn't go down, Ms. Brooks. It was rerouted through a federal server the moment we detected the interference. 12,000 people watched Police Chief Brennan threaten to murder you and Judge Callahan. The video went viral in minutes." Maya's eyes widened in disbelief. "But my phone died." "Your phone died, but the backup system you installed kept broadcasting. Very clever work." Chen's expression softened slightly. "We've been investigating this conspiracy for months, but we needed someone on the inside to give us the evidence we needed. You just handed us everything." As they were helped to their feet, Callahan could see the full scope of the federal operation unfolding around them. The courthouse was surrounded by FBI vehicles, and agents were systematically arresting everyone connected to the conspiracy. Through his window, he could see Senator Morrison being led away in handcuffs, his face purple with rage. "Agent Chun," Callahan croaked, his throat raw from the gas, "Alana Brooks, the execution has been stayed indefinitely by federal order," Chun replied. "Ms. Brooks is currently being transferred to federal protective custody. She's safe, Judge Callahan. You both did it." Maya collapsed against the wall, tears streaming down her face. "She's really safe? They can't hurt her anymore." "They can't hurt anyone anymore," Chin confirmed. "We have enough evidence to put Morrison, Brennan, Kane, and at least a dozen others away for life. The photographs you provided, combined with the testimony we've gathered from other victims, paint a picture of corruption that goes back decades." As they were escorted from the building, Callahan saw something that made his heart soar. Standing in the courthouse lobby, flanked by federal marshals but no longer in shackles, was Alana Brooks. She was wearing civilian clothes for the first time in 15 years, and when she saw Maya, Her face lit up with a joy so pure it was almost blinding. "Maya!" Alana cried, breaking free from her escorts and running toward her daughter. This time, no one tried to stop them. Mother and daughter collided in an embrace that 15 years of separation couldn't diminish, holding each other as if they were afraid the other might disappear. "I thought I'd lost you," Alana sobbed into Maya's hair. "When they told me what happened, I thought." "I'm okay, Mama. We're both okay. And you're free. You're finally free." Judge Callahan watched the reunion through tears he didn't bother to hide. In 35 years on the bench, he had never seen anything more beautiful than a mother holding her child after being separated by injustice. Agent Chun approached him, her expression serious. "Judge Callahan, we're going to need your testimony in the federal case. Are you prepared for what that means?" Callahan nodded without hesitation. "I'll testify to everything. Every detail, every conversation, every moment of corruption I witnessed. These people destroyed an innocent woman's life, and they need to pay for it." "It won't be easy," Chun warned. "Morrison has connections everywhere. He'll try to discredit you, claim you were compromised, that your judgment was clouded by emotion." "Let him try," Callahan replied, his voice stronger than it had been in years. "I've spent my entire career hiding behind the law, using it as an excuse to avoid making the hard moral choices. Not anymore. If my reputation is the price of justice, then it's a price I'm willing to pay." Maya looked up from her mother's embrace, her face glowing with gratitude. "Your Honor, I don't know how to thank you. You risked everything for us." "You don't need to thank me, Maya. You're the one who did the impossible. You're the one who never gave up, who fought for the truth when everyone else had abandoned it." Callahan paused, thinking of Sarah, of the woman she would have become. "You're exactly the kind of person this world needs more of." As they prepared to leave the courthouse, Agent Chun pulled Callahan aside. "Judge, there's something else you should know. The investigation has uncovered evidence of at least 17 other wrongful convictions connected to this conspiracy. 17 other innocent people whose lives were destroyed by Morrison and his network." The number hit Callahan like a physical blow. 17 other Alana Brooks, 17 other families torn apart by corruption masquerading as justice. What happens to them now? "That's where we need your help," Chun said. "We need someone with your experience and credibility to head up a special review board. Someone who understands the system but isn't afraid to tear it down when it's broken." Callahan looked at Alana and Maya, still holding each other as if they were afraid to let go. He thought about Sarah, about the legacy she would have wanted him to leave. He thought about the 17 other innocent people still sitting in prison, still waiting for someone to believe them. "I'll do it," he said without hesitation. "Whatever it takes, however long it takes, I'll help free every innocent person this conspiracy destroyed." Agent Chun smiled, the first genuine smile he had seen from her. "I was hoping you'd say that." As they walked out of the courthouse together, Callahan felt something he hadn't experienced in years: hope. Not just for Alana and Maya, but for the entire system of justice that had been so badly corrupted. Outside, the media was waiting in force. Cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions, but Callahan barely noticed them. His attention was focused on Alana Brooks, who was standing in the sunlight for the first time in 15 years as a free woman. She looked up at the sky, tears streaming down her face, and whispered something that only Maya could hear. But Callahan could read her lips, and the words made his heart swell with emotion. "Thank you, God. Thank you for bringing my baby back to me." Maya squeezed her mother's hand and looked directly at the cameras. When she spoke, her voice carried the strength of someone who had moved mountains through sheer force of will. "My mother spent 15 years on death row for a crime she didn't commit. She was framed by corrupt officials who thought they could destroy her because she was young, black, and poor. But they underestimated something. They underestimated a daughter's love for her mother, and they underestimated the power of truth to overcome even the darkest lies." She paused, her hand moving instinctively to her stomach, to the new life growing there, a life that would grow up in a world where justice had finally prevailed. "This isn't just about my mother," Maya continued. "This is about every innocent person sitting in prison right now, waiting for someone to believe them. This is about making sure that what happened to my family never happens to anyone else's family." Judge Callahan stepped forward, his voice carrying across the crowd of reporters and onlookers. Today, justice was served. Not by the system, but in spite of it. And I promise you this, we will not rest until every innocent person wrongfully convicted by this conspiracy is free. We will not rest until the system serves justice instead of protecting the powerful. As they walked away from the courthouse, Alana Brooks took her first steps as a free woman with her daughter by her side and the man who had saved them both walking beside them. The road ahead would be long. There would be trials, investigations, and the difficult work of rebuilding lives that had been shattered by corruption. But for the first time in 15 years, Alana Brooks was walking toward a future instead of away from one. And that future included the daughter she had never stopped loving and the grandchild she would finally get to hold. The sun was setting over the courthouse, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. And as they walked into that sunset, Judge Richard Callahan realized that sometimes, just sometimes, the arc of the moral universe really did bend toward justice. It just took people brave enough to grab it and pull. Yes. I'm literally crying tears of joy right now. They made it. Alana is free, Maya is safe, and the corrupt officials are finally going to pay for what they did. But can you believe Maya was pregnant this whole time and still risked everything to save her mother? That's the kind of love that moves mountains. What do you think happens in the final confrontation? Let me know in the comments, and if this story is hitting you as hard as it's hitting me, make sure you're subscribed because we're about to bring this home. 6 months later, the federal courthouse in Atlanta was packed to capacity for what the media had dubbed the trial of the century. Judge Richard Callahan sat in the witness box, his hand steady on the Bible as he prepared to deliver testimony that would either vindicate 15 years of injustice or destroy what remained of his reputation forever. Across the courtroom, Senator James Morrison sat at the defendant's table, his silver hair perfectly styled, his expensive suit immaculate. But his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes that had once held absolute power, now burned with the fury of a man watching his empire crumble. Your Honor, Federal Prosecutor Sarah Martinez began, her voice carrying to every corner of the packed courtroom. Please tell the jury about the events of that night 6 months ago when you granted Alana Brooks' request to sing. Callahan's voice was steady as he recounted the story that had captivated the nation. But as he spoke, his eyes kept drifting to the gallery, where Alana Brooks sat in the front row, her hand resting protectively on Maya's growing belly. Maya was 7 months pregnant now, glowing with the kind of happiness that comes from knowing your child will grow up in a world where truth matters more than power. And what happened when Ms. Brooks began to sing? Martinez continued. Something extraordinary, Callahan replied, his voice thick with emotion. Her voice, it wasn't just beautiful. It was pure. It was the sound of a soul that had been crushed but never broken, of a spirit that 15 years of injustice couldn't destroy. And in that moment, I realized that I had been looking at this case, at every case, completely wrong. Morrison's defense attorney, a sharp-faced man named Bradley Thornton, objected. Your Honor, the witness is offering opinion, not fact. Overruled, Federal Judge Patricia Williams replied firmly. The witness may continue. Callahan nodded gratefully. I realized that I had spent 35 years on the bench dispensing law, but I had forgotten about justice. I had forgotten that behind every case file, every docket number, every sentencing guideline, there was a human being whose life hung in the balance. In the gallery, Alana wiped tears from her eyes. Beside her, Maya squeezed her mother's hand, remembering that moment when her mother's voice had filled the courtroom and changed everything. Judge Callahan, Martinez continued, what happened when you discovered the evidence that Ms. Maya Brooks had gathered? I realized that I, had been part of the greatest miscarriage of justice I had ever witnessed. Callahan's voice grew stronger, more determined. The evidence was overwhelming. Detective Morrison had planted evidence, coerced witnesses, and falsified reports. Dr. Webb had fabricated forensic evidence. And it was all done to protect a conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of state government. Morrison leaned forward in his chair, his face twisted with rage. Throughout the trial, he had maintained his innocence, claiming that he was the victim of a politically motivated witch hunt. But now, faced with Callahan's testimony, his mask was finally slipping. And what was the motive for this conspiracy? Martinez asked. Callahan's eyes locked with Morrison's across the courtroom. Sexual assault. Senator Morrison and his associates had assaulted Ms. Brooks at a private party. When she refused to be silenced, when she threatened to expose what they had done, they decided to destroy her life completely. They framed her for murder and sent her to death row, all to cover up their crimes. The courtroom erupted in whispers, but Judge Williams quickly restored order with a sharp rap of her gavel. Morrison's attorney stood up. "Objection. This is speculation and hearsay." "Your Honor," Martinez replied calmly, "we have photographic evidence of the assault, witness testimony, and a signed confession from Detective Morrison detailing the conspiracy. This is not speculation, this is documented fact." Judge Williams nodded. Overruled. The witness may continue. Callahan took a deep breath, knowing that his next words would seal Morrison's fate forever. Senator Morrison didn't just frame an innocent woman for murder. He destroyed 17 other lives through wrongful convictions. He corrupted an entire justice system to protect his own crimes. And he would have killed Ms. Maya Brooks and myself to keep his secrets buried. In the gallery, Maya felt her baby kick, as if responding to the gravity of the moment. She placed both hands on her belly and whispered a silent promise. "Your grandmother is going to be free, little one. You're going to grow up in a world where justice matters." Morrison's attorney began his cross-examination, trying desperately to discredit Callahan's testimony. "Judge Callahan, isn't it true that you were facing mandatory retirement? That your career was essentially over regardless of the outcome of this case?" "Yes," Callahan replied without hesitation. "And isn't it true that you had been criticized throughout your career for being too harsh in your sentencing, particularly toward minority defendants?" Callahan's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "Yes, that's true." "So isn't it possible that your sudden change of heart was motivated not by justice, but by a desire to rehabilitate your legacy before retirement?" The question hung in the air like poison, and Callahan could feel the weight of 35 years of judicial decisions pressing down on him. Every harsh sentence, every time he had chosen law over mercy, every moment he had failed to see the humanity in the defendants who appeared before him. "Mr. Thornton," Callahan said quietly, "you're absolutely right. I was too harsh. I did fail to show mercy when mercy was called for. I did let my prejudices influence my decisions. And yes, I am trying to rehabilitate my legacy." The admission sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Morrison's attorney smiled, thinking he had scored a decisive blow. But Callahan wasn't finished. "But here's what you don't understand," he continued, his voice growing stronger. "I'm not trying to rehabilitate my legacy by lying or covering up the truth. I'm trying to rehabilitate it by finally doing the right thing. By admitting my mistakes and working to correct them. By choosing justice over reputation, truth over convenience." He turned to face the jury directly. "I spent 35 years on the bench, and I made countless mistakes. But the biggest mistake I ever made was sentencing Alana Brooks to death for a crime she didn't commit. And if admitting that mistake, if exposing this conspiracy, if destroying my own reputation is what it takes to free 17 innocent people from prison, then it's a price I'm willing to pay." The courtroom was dead silent. Even Morrison's attorney seemed stunned by the raw honesty of Callahan's testimony. "Because at the end of the day," Callahan continued, "my legacy doesn't matter. My reputation doesn't matter. What matters is that an innocent woman spent 15 years on death row because I was too proud, too prejudiced, and too cowardly to see the truth that was right in front of me." In the gallery, Alana Brooks stood up, tears streaming down her face. "Your Honor," she called out, her voice carrying across the silent courtroom. Judge Williams should have ordered her to sit down, should have maintained courtroom decorum. But something in Alana's voice, something in the moment itself, made her pause. "Your Honor," Alana continued, "I forgive you. I forgive all of you. Because holding on to anger and hatred would just be another kind of prison, and I'm finally free." The words hit the courtroom like a thunderbolt. Here was a woman who had lost 15 years of her life, who had been separated from her daughter, who had faced execution for a crime she didn't commit, and she was offering forgiveness to the people who had destroyed her life. Morrison shot to his feet, his face purple with rage. "This is ridiculous. This whole trial is a sham. You people have no idea what you're dealing with. I have connections, I have power." "You had power," Judge Williams interrupted coldly. Past tense. "Bailiff, please restrain the defendant." As Morrison was forced back into his seat, still ranting about his connections and his influence, Callahan realized that the man's greatest weakness had always been his inability to understand that real power, the kind that mattered, came not from corruption and intimidation, but from truth and justice and the courage to do what was right. The trial continued for 3 more days, But the outcome was never in doubt. The evidence was overwhelming, the testimony devastating, and Morrison's own behavior in the courtroom had sealed his fate. When the jury returned with their verdict, guilty on all counts, Morrison's empire finally crumbled completely. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, along with Police Chief Brennan, District Attorney General Kane, and 8 other co-conspirators. But the real victory came later, in a smaller courtroom across town, where Judge Patricia Williams, now presiding over the special review board that Callahan had agreed to head, officially exonerated Alana Brooks and 16 other wrongfully convicted defendants. As Alana's conviction was formally overturned, as the words "not guilty" were spoken for the first time in 15 years, she collapsed into Maya's arms, sobbing with relief and joy and the overwhelming knowledge that justice had finally been served. "It's over, Mama," Maya whispered, her own tears mixing with her mother's. "It's finally over." But Callahan knew it wasn't really over. It was just the beginning. The beginning of a new chapter in all their lives, a chapter where truth mattered more than power, where justice was more important than politics, where a mother's love for her daughter could move mountains and change the world. As they walked out of the courthouse together, Alana Brooks, finally and forever free, Maya Brooks, carrying the next generation of their family, and Richard Callahan, a man redeemed by his willingness to choose justice over everything else, the sun was shining brighter than it had in 15 years. And somewhere in that sunshine, in the laughter of a mother and daughter reunited, in the promise of new life growing in Maya's belly, was the proof that sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys really do win. I'm sobbing. Actual tears. The moment when Alana forgave everyone, even after everything they put her through, that's the kind of grace that changes the world. And Morrison finally got what he deserved. But wait until you see how this story ends. It's going to be absolutely perfect. What did you think of Alana's forgiveness? Let me know in the comments below. 2 years later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of the small church where Alana Brooks had learned to sing as a child. The same church where her mother had taught her that her voice was a gift from God, meant to touch lives and heal hearts. Today, that voice would be heard in celebration rather than sorrow. Judge Richard Callahan, now retired from the bench but busier than ever as head of the Innocence Review Board, sat in the front pew, watching as Alana adjusted the microphone at the altar. She wore a simple white dress, her hair adorned with flowers that Maya had picked from the garden of their new home. At 41, she looked younger than she had at 26, as if freedom had reversed the aging process and given her back the years that injustice had stolen. In the second pew, Maya Brooks Martinez sat with her husband Carlos, a civil rights attorney she had met while testifying at congressional hearings about wrongful convictions. Their 18-month-old daughter, Sarah Grace, named for both Callahan's daughter and the amazing grace that had saved them all, babbled happily in her father's arms, her bright eyes taking in everything around her. Sarah Grace had her grandmother's eyes and her mother's determined chin, and Callahan knew she would grow up in a world where her family's story was one of triumph rather than tragedy. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alana said into the microphone, her voice carrying the same power that had stopped a courtroom cold 3 years ago, "welcome to the second annual Freedom Day celebration." The church was packed with faces that told stories of redemption and justice delayed but not denied. In the third row sat Marcus Williams, wrongfully convicted of armed robbery and freed after 17 years when the Innocence Review Board uncovered evidence of police misconduct. Behind him was Jennifer Chun, exonerated after 12 years on death row for a murder committed by her abusive ex-husband. And scattered throughout the congregation were dozens of other men and women whose lives had been restored by the work that had begun in courtroom 7A 3 years ago. 3 years ago, Alana continued, I stood in a courtroom with 3 days left to live, asking for one final chance to sing. I thought I was asking for the chance to say goodbye to my daughter. I had no idea I was actually asking for the chance to say hello to the rest of my life. In the front row, Callahan wiped tears from his eyes. The Innocence Review Board had now exonerated 43 wrongfully convicted individuals, with dozens more cases under investigation. It was the work he should have been doing his entire career, and though he couldn't get back the years he had wasted, he could make sure that every day going forward counted for something. Today we celebrate not just freedom, but the power of truth to overcome even the darkest lies, Alana said. We celebrate the courage of those who refuse to give up, even when the whole world seems to be against them. And we celebrate the love that binds us together, the love between mothers and children, between families torn apart by injustice but reunited by grace. Maya stood up, Carlos helping her navigate around the other congregants with baby Sarah in her arms. When she reached the altar, she handed her daughter to Alana, and the sight of grandmother holding granddaughter for the first time in public brought tears to every eye in the church. "This is Sarah Grace," Alana said, her voice thick with emotion as she looked down at the beautiful child in her arms. "She will never know a world where her grandmother was considered a criminal. She will never know a world where justice is for sale to the highest bidder. She will grow up knowing that truth matters, that love conquers hate, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to give up." Baby Sarah reached up and touched her grandmother's face, and Alana laughed, a sound of pure joy that filled the church like music. "And now," Alana said, "I want to sing for you. Not because I'm saying goodbye, but because I'm saying hello. Hello to all the tomorrows I thought I'd never see. Hello to all the dreams I thought were dead. Hello to the granddaughter I never thought I'd hold." She handed Sarah back to Maya and stepped up to the microphone. When she opened her mouth to sing, the first notes of Amazing Grace filled the church, but this time the song was different. This time it wasn't sung by a woman facing death, but by a woman celebrating life. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound, that saved a wretch like me. In the congregation, former inmates wept openly. Lawyers who had fought for years to free innocent clients felt their hearts swell with pride. And Judge Richard Callahan closed his eyes and listened to the voice that had changed his life, the voice that had taught him what justice really meant. "I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see." And it always finds a way to turn sorrow into joy, despair into hope, and endings into new beginnings. The story of Alana Brooks was far from over. It was just beginning. And somewhere in the distance, carried on the evening breeze, you could still hear the echo of her voice, singing of amazing grace and the power of love to overcome even the darkest night. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound of freedom, the sound of justice, the sound of a mother's love that had moved mountains and changed the world. I'm completely overwhelmed with emotion right now. This story has everything: justice, redemption, love, hope, and the most beautiful ending I could have imagined. Alana got to hold her granddaughter, Maya found love and purpose, and Judge Callahan discovered what real justice looks like. But most importantly, their story is inspiring others to keep fighting for truth and justice. What was your favorite moment in this incredible journey? Let me know in the comments below, and if this story touched your heart the way it touched mine, please subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear this message of hope. Thank you for taking this emotional journey with me. Stories like this are exactly why I do what I do. If you love this story, you will surely enjoy the next one. It's crazier and more intriguing than you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.